Good afternoon and welcome to the Glendale Water and Power Commission meeting. Today is Monday, October 5th, 2009. Sheila, may we have roll call, please?
Commissioner Chan.
Present.
Commissioner Ibrahimian.
Present.
Commissioner Miller.
Present.
Commissioner Chair. Yao.
Present. Thank you. Next item, please.
Consider minutes of the September 14th meeting.
Are there any questions or do I have a motion?
I make a motion that the minutes be accepted as drafted.
Is there a second?
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. So minutes are approved. Next item, please.
Item 3, reports information. 3A, Glenn Steiger, report number 1, quarterly risk management update.
Thank you very much, members of the Commission. Before we get to the quarterly risk management report, I'd like to make just a couple of comments. One being that I'd like to thank Commissioner Chan and Commissioner Miller for accompanying us on a tour of the Sacramento Delta Friday and Saturday of last week. I really appreciate you giving up 2 days for that. Hopefully you found it as informative and interesting as I did, and truly appreciate that. And it is obviously a big issue for us and for the state, and the more that we can understand how that works, I think the better off we all are. So again, I want to thank you very much, and certainly extend the offer to our other commissioners. So next time we do it, please, if you can, please try to come along. Appreciate that. Secondly, I'd like to mention that we have just put out our quarterly report for the fourth quarter of fiscal 2009, April to June. It's a little bit late, but it's the first time we have put out what we call an integrated quarterly report, which integrates the statistics and accomplishments for both electric and water together. From now on, you'll be receiving this on a quarterly basis, much more timely, but this will be the first, and this is the format we will be using, and we think it will be a much better way to track what GWP is doing. It tracks everything as we've set forth in our strategic plan, both through the scoreboard and through the individual activities report, and an electronic version of this is available on the GWP website. Now I'd like to introduce Steve Linz, our Assistant General Manager of Power Supply, who will give you an update on our quarterly risk management report.
Mr. President, members of the Commission, once again, Steve Linz, Assistant General Manager of Supply. And I'm going to give you a quick quarterly update on risk management. And this actually will probably be the last time that I give you a quarterly risk management update, because I think Mr. Steiger introduced you our new Assistant General Manager of Finance. One of his responsibilities will be to oversee risk management, and we're currently working with him to kind of pass that duty on to him. And we're also working with our outside risk management company, RMI Inc., to develop some periodic risk management reporting. And you may see some of that next quarter as well, in addition to the types of reporting that we've been giving to you to date. So I've handed out a couple of colorful bar charts to you just to give you an idea of where we stand at the end of this quarter. The first one is titled Percent of System Hedged Physically and Financially, and it should be in front of you. It's got blue on the bottom, red on the top, bar chart. Over the quarter, we made some financial purchases in addition to the physical purchases or contracts that we already had in place. And this chart represents the summation of all of those purchases, and it represents the amount of our system needs for which the price is locked in. So if you look at that first bar on the left side of the chart, it's November of 2009, you can see that almost 100% of our system energy needs are locked in, either financially or physically. And you'll also see over time that this we discussed at the last quarterly update. Over time, as we go out towards the right side of the chart in April 11, we've got less hedged because we're less sure of what the market looks like, and so we're leaving more open to the market until we have some time to evaluate and maybe add some purchases in as we approach that month. You'll see in April 10 there's a dip down of the physical total there, and this is just a good example of the types of things that we have to deal with. In April of 10, the physical portion of the system takes a dip there, and that's because both IPP and San Juan are down for maintenance in that month. So we had to make up for that with financial purchases. So that's where the system stands from a hedge perspective. I handed out one more bar chart, and this is a little bit busy, but I'd like to walk through it with you. It's titled Monthly Resource Stack.
Excuse me, could you present these on the board there, or is it not available
It's
on the
not
screen?
available. I
Okay.
have hard copy. Next time we can make sure we can bring them on electronic so that we can put them up on the... What this shows is an example of, over time, what our resource stack looks like. And I'll just highlight a couple of things. If you look at the bottom, that's where some of the Grayson units are base loaded in, Grayson's 3, 4, and 5. And those are the units that take our landfill gas. That landfill gas is take or pay. So you look across that bottom of that chart, and that magenta bar is kind of steady across the entire bar chart. Up above that, the next big block of turquoise is Magnolia, and we've got a good portion of the Magnolia power plant. Above that, you've got a big block of yellow, which is IPP, which is coal, which we base load again. So although it's not a lot of capacity, we're taking it pretty much around the clock, and it adds up to a lot of megawatt hours. And just one point of interest, if you'll see from March 10 to October of 10, there's a green block towards the top of the bars. Those are from a wind project, Pebble Springs, that we've taken and shaped. That project, the energy is generated as the wind blows, and we've worked with the counterparty to take the wind as it blows and give it to us on peak from March 10 to October 10, and that's that green block. And you'll see after, starting November, December, 10, and then January on, that block disappears and won't reappear until March of 11, which we've done a similar shaping so that we can deal with the kind of the intermittent nature of some of the wind resources that we have. So that's the update for this time around. If you have questions, I'll be glad to answer them.
What are our plans with IPP going further into the future?
Well, currently we have a contract that lasts through 2027. We've been hearing rumors from some of the bigger participants like LA that they may try to get out by 2020. We're still trying to figure out what that looks like. I think at this point in time, we're still intending to stay in till 2027 and meet our renewable portfolio standard commitments through buying renewable energy with other projects.
And that's 35% by 2020?
Well, I mean, currently the council adopted standard is 20% by 2017, 23% if it's economically viable. We know that there's a 33% by 2020 looming. 2 bills were passed. The governor's threatening a veto, and Lana Haddad's going to be speaking to you a little bit more about the status of those bills when she comes up. So we are shooting for 33% by 2020, and we're way ahead of that curve. At the time, if you include Hoover, we're at around 23% already. Without it, we're at around 16, 17%. The first milestone that we anticipate is probably a 20% or 23% by 2013-14, and that depends on what happens with the bills. But we're way ahead many of our sister utilities in the area, and well situated to meet any of the mandates as they come out.
Okay.
Just to add to that, IPP will be doing a complete strategic plan over the next 6 months, which will evaluate all the possible options surrounding what to do with IPP, whether to continue it past 2027 as a coal plant, whether to expand it, whether to transition it to something else, natural gas, which is a possibility, to put more renewables in that area because of the availability of the transmission from that area. So I'll say reasonably, in less than a year, we should have a very, very good idea of what the options are and what direction IPP itself will take. That will determine, to somewhat of a degree, where we will go with IPP also.
And actually, some of those alternatives include actually adding biomass to the coal that's currently being burnt in those units, and potentially, instead of a Unit 3, maybe putting a new, natural gas peaker, which is much less NOx emissions than the coal.
Okay, thanks. Can I make one note before we move on? I just want to thank Glenn, GWP, for giving me the opportunity to go on the Delta trip, the California State Water Project. It was very valuable. I walked away feeling like I have firsthand experience, of all the issues that were discussed, and then I totally see the urgency of coming up with a solution for all the different issues.
Thanks.
Yes, Mr. Lenz, thank you for your presentation. The percent hedged, if I understand correctly, is the natural gas that's acquired by long-term contract. Is that correct?
What we've done is we've taken all of our energy needs and converted that to MMBTUs. So this is our entire system needs, whether it's you're buying electricity on the market or buying gas on the market. 100% on this chart represents 100% of the energy that we need for our system.
Right.
And so that first bar there that's almost at 100%, let's just call it 98%, means that the prices for 98% of our needs for November of 2009 are locked in.
They're locked in.
It may not mean that the physical energy is locked in, but through the use of financial instruments, we've locked in the price so that we've got some price certainty for the entire system for that month.
Okay, just for that month and not by way of a long-term contract then. I thought maybe it was a long-term contract that was being used.
Well, each if you look at each bar, every month there is a different set of resources.
Right.
In that first bar, you've got a certain set of financial NYMEX purchases and a certain set of contracts. For the most part, almost 50% of our system is long-term contracts, and that's consistent across the entire chart.
Okay.
If you go kind of across 50% and carry that across, that's pretty much all of our outside contract and long-term resources.
Okay, I see. So the difference between the top of the chart, which is in red, and the 100% represents a market purchase.
Well, it's market exposure to price of 2%.
Okay, all right. Just want to make sure I understood that. Thank you. By the way, I'll chime in with what Commissioner Chan said and also thank GWP and MWD for the excellent tour. And I'd like to say I thought it was so educational and valuable that it would be nice if the ratepayers and the council and everyone else could go on it, but since that's not possible, I understand we will be having a presentation on some of the key points here at one of the commission meetings in the near future.
Yes, in fact, Lana is working on it as we speak, and we're trying to narrow it down to probably the second or third week in November.
And so I'd just like to mention anyone watching will probably want to tune into that. There would be a presentation on problems that that area faces, through which I believe 2/3 of the state's drinking water flows down here to south. And, of course, understanding the problems will be important to understanding any solutions that need to be implemented. And I would say they were urgent, in my opinion. Thank you.
And Mr. Lin, just one last, unless Mr. Commissioner Abraham, you have a question?
Yeah, I had a quick question regarding it.
Okay,
Don't
I
mind.
have one too.
Yeah, regarding the chart, so whatever you show here is already set for the future all the way till April of 11. Is that?
You're talking about the percent of system hedged
Right,
chart? Yes. All those prices are locked in through April 11.
Yeah, thank you.
And Mr. Lins, regarding the other chart, you mentioned that the wind power from Pebble Springs started in March of 2010, but it shows like the green started this month or last month into this month.
Yeah,
October.
September and October of
Right.
2009 are the 2 months before we had that hedge. Well, actually, no, that's the end of 2009. I'm sorry. That's the end of the 2009 hedge. For calendar 2009, we shaped it March to October. For calendar 10, we shaped it. For every year, it's March to October.
The monthly resource stat, this chart.
Yeah.
So I see that there's a green box in September 2009 and October 2009. Is that for the wind power from Pebble Springs?
Yes, that's the same wind power that I've been talking about for March of 10 to October 10.
Okay.
That's Pebble Springs that's been shaped for March 09 to October 09.
Okay, so the contract has started, and we've been taking power from that wind source,
Correct.
right? So that's part of your overall RPS, renewable
Yes.
energy portfolio. Great. Okay, I wasn't sure that it's started next year rather than this year. Okay, thank you. Yes, Commissioner Miller?
A couple of more questions. The projected hedging here has been determined by the risk manager. Is that correct?
Well, at this time, this chart is put together by TEA and our trading group because we're just now getting our in-house risk management group together. So this actually is not generated by the risk manager. The risk manager is working on a reporting system. He's populating that system with data, and he's going to be putting out some of his own periodic reports. These are currently put out by the trading group and TEA, who helps put them put all of these physical and financial hedges in place.
We contract with them for this service.
Yes.
Okay. What would be the expected projection of hedging in the future, do you think? Because right here we have it, we're in October 2010, so we've got a 6-month projection. Is that going to be kind of standard?
We actually generally look out. I mean, we're trying to give you, where are we here?
Oh, I'm sorry.
This is 18 months.
A year and a half, excuse
Yeah,
me.
this is about 18 months. We typically look
Okay.
out 36.
Okay.
And as you get further out, the percentage of system hedge continues to drop off almost on the similar slope that follows the top of these bars.
Yes.
And so as you get out 36 months, at the 36-month mark, you've got no extra hedges on. You've just got all of your long-term contracts, so you're down to kind of that 50% mark.
Okay, so we're looking at 3-year projection then.
Correct.
Is that redone every month or every quarter?
It's a rolling 3-year.
Okay, thank you.
Maybe one last thing. So, Mr. Lins, how would one make money out of this? How would GWP be on a positive end or in the money by doing this type of hedge?
Well, our purpose is not to make money. Our purpose for the whole program is to stabilize prices for the ratepayer.
Right.
So it's a matter of scaling in over time at particular buying opportunities. And that's determined by proprietary model that's developed by TEA, so that if prices are dramatically low relative to system volatility, we might buy a little extra further out.
Because my understanding is from the strategic plan that the potential to enhance revenue by hedging or doing more financial and physical instruments, is that an opportunity based on this chart, or is it something?
Well, no, this is kind of price stabilization. Wholesale revenue is a different area where we're taking excess resources that we don't need for the system. This is the percentage of energy that we think we need to cover our native load, the ratepayers in Glendale. At any given time, we've got more resources than we need to provide electricity to the citizens of Glendale. So we take those extra resources and optimize them. So you may not need some energy in the summer, or depending on the time of year, you have excess resources and you go out into the market and you might sell a call option to Nevada Power for a quarter or something, or you might just sell power to somebody at a certain time of the market. So you're making wholesale revenue by optimizing your excess resources. This depicts what we need to serve our native load.
Right. And it's based
wholesale is what's on top of that. It's
Right.
excess resources.
So, good explanation. And this is based on the historical load that the citizens of Glendale need, or just based on?
It's based on historical load, but then also on a forecasting model that we use, which is Hinwood and various weather models. And, we project that out forward, and it's obviously not exact, but it's closer than you might think. And then as we get closer in, those are adjusted to meet the actual load every day.
Great. Thank you. Good explanation. Anything else? The next item, Sheila?
Item 3B, new ordinance pertaining to terms of office of members of boards and commissions.
Good afternoon, members of the Commission. Mr. Steiger asked me to give you an update regarding Ordinance 5669, which was adopted by the City Council last month regarding, as Sheila mentioned, the terms of office and the appointment process for Title II commissions, which would include the Glendale Water and Power Commission. So I've given you a little packet of information, which is probably more information than you need, but I wanted to give you copies of the motion, the ordinance, and the resolution touching on this issue so you could read through it if you'd like to. And I also wanted to mention that I am absolutely available if you have any questions about the ordinance or how it affects you. What I'd like to do is just go through some high points in the ordinance, then explain what it means to you as GWP commissioners, also what it means to the public, and then I'll take any questions that you have today. First, by way of background, in October of 2007, the City Council adopted a resolution which revised the process for appointing new Title II commissioners, including GWP commissioners. As you may know or recall, it used to be a process where 2 of the City Council members would be appointed to be the nominating body, and they would get together and nominate someone for new commissions, and then that would go to the full council. As of October of 2007, the new process is that 1 of the council members nominates someone for a commission, then it goes to the full council for nomination, or rather for adoption of that person to the commission. In September of this year, September 1st, the City Council adopted a motion that removed all commissioners, except the Design Review Board, all commissioners from their appointment. This removal is only effective upon the reappointment or the appointment of a new person to serve the commission. So, although you've been effectively removed from your position, it doesn't go into effect until a new person is appointed. On September 8th, Ordinance 5669 was adopted, and this ordinance changes the term limits and the appointment process for commissioners. So what does Ordinance 5669 say? Well, it says a lot about other commissioners, but the meat of it for GWP Commission is in Section 13 of that ordinance. What it does is it changes the term of GWP commissioners and other Title II commissioners from 3 years to 4-year terms. The terms now will coincide with the term of the council person who appoints you to your position. So when that council person's term ends, your term would end as well, and you would need to be reappointed if you wanted to serve again on the GWP Commission. Now, your term is limited to 2 consecutive terms. There's an exception to that for anyone who is reappointed to the Commission in either October or November of this year. If you're appointed in October or November of this year, you can serve, in addition to the term that you are appointed for beginning in October or November of this year, you have 2 full terms beyond that. So it's a slight longer period of time than if you're appointed subsequently after that. There's a limitation, and I believe it's in the existing ordinance as well, that you can't serve on more than 1 commission at once. And also, as far as the 2-year consecutive terms, there is an exception where if the council makes a finding that there's no one else available to serve that position, or upon a finding that it's in the best interest of the city, your term could be extended beyond those 2-year terms. Those 2 consecutive 4-year terms. Okay, so specifically, procedurally, what it means for you as GWP commissioners. So, as I mentioned, there was that motion that took away your appointment, but that does not go into effect until you are reappointed or until someone else is appointed. So your current appointment does continue in effect. If you're interested in continuing to serve as a GWP commissioner, then you need to get in touch with the city clerk's office no later than Monday, October 12th. And the person that you would contact is Michael Dunn, but if you contact the city clerk's office, just let them know if indeed you're interested in continuing to serve on the GWP Commission. So in order to be reappointed, it's now under this new resolution, it would be by one of the members of the Glendale City Council. And each member of the Glendale City Council can appoint 1 person to each commission. So I should say not appoint. That council person would nominate you. And then at that point, it will go to the full city council for appointment. Now, the process takes place in 2 city council meetings. The first meeting, they would announce who their nominees are, and then at the next city council meeting, they would appoint. They would decide who they wanted to appoint to the commission. And your appointment would become effective as soon as you're appointed by the city council. As mentioned, the term that you would have would then be consistent with whatever the council member that appointed you, whatever their term is. So at the very end of your packet, I've given you the terms of the various city council members. Two of the council members' terms are up in 2011, and the other three expire in April of 2013. So once you're appointed or reappointed, how long could you serve? If you were appointed in October or November of this year, you could serve a term coterminous with whatever council member appointed you, and then beyond that, you would have 2 additional 4-year terms that you could serve. If you were appointed subsequent to that, then you would have just the 2 4-year terms in which you could serve. Okay, so next, what does this mean to members of the public? The appointment process is also open to members of the public that may be interested in applying to serve on the GWP Commission. And the City Clerk's Office has issued a press release to the public notifying members of the public that may be interested that they can certainly apply as well if they would be interested in serving on the Commission. And applications would need to be turned in this week for anyone who might be interested. And those interested individuals could contact the City Clerk's Office for further information. The number is 818-548-2090. And so with that, I would ask if there are any questions. I'd be happy to answer them.
Thanks, Ms. Godinez, for a great explanation. I just have one question about the terms. So once, let's say we get reappointed, becomes a 2-year term, and if, let's say, Councilmember Weaver or Draymond reappoints us, that means we serve additional 4 years if they get reelected and they reappoint us. Is that the process now that we're tied to each council member?
So you are tied to each council member. That's correct, Commissioner. Yeah. So if you were appointed by a council member whose term expires in 2011, your term would also expire in 2011, and then you'd be eligible for reappointment beginning at that time in April of 2011. So if you were reappointed, your next term would then be for, it could be a 4-year term, but it would be consistent with whatever council member nominated you at that time.
So let's say if, hypothetically, for Councilmember Draymond and Weaver, if they don't get reelected in 2011, that means whoever was appointed by them starting next month won't be on the commission unless they get reappointed by the new council member?
Right. And in fact, even if they are reelected, you're not automatically renewed as a commissioner. You would have to be reappointed. So whether or not they're reelected, your term ends when their term ends.
And then for argument's sake, if they get reelected, say, twice in 2011 and then 2015, that means, and reappoint us to the same term, that means we can serve for two of those terms. And even though they get reelected the 3rd time, they can't reappoint us again, right? Because we serve our maximum of 2 terms.
That's correct.
Any other questions? Great, thank you. Next item, please.
Item 3C, Customer Service and Support Services.
Hello, Chairman Yao, members of the Commission. I'm Ned Basson with Customer and Support Service. Last meeting, the question came up about our low-income programs and how we were doing on promoting those programs. Let me give you a little background. Back in about November of last year, our primary low-income program was called Senior Care. Senior Care was for low-income customers who were also seniors, and we had about 4,800 customers in senior care at that time. We created a new program called Glendale Care, which went into effect in January of this year, and it is for all low-income customers. We estimate that in Glendale there are approximately 20,000 households that would be classified as low income. And since January, we have signed up about 3,800 3,200 customers into the Glendale Care. So we are now at about 8,000 customers. Back in November, we estimated it would take about 3 years to fully subscribe to our program. And so over about 9 months, we've signed up about 3,000. Over 36 months, we would expect to sign up about 12,000. And if you add that to the senior care members that are still in senior care, we're then close to about 18,000. I don't think that we'll continue at the rate that we are. That would be a very high achievement, but we are moving along. We provide information to every new customer, both when they sign up and with our welcome packet. We go out to adult daycare centers, work with community-based organizations, senior centers, relief centers, relief organizations, and they provide copies of our information for the low-income programs. We will have some of our people go out to centers and speak when that's available to us. We have our information on the board at the Social Security Administration. Each April, we in our from the Source newsletter, we publish all of our programs, and that includes the low-income programs. And we are currently talking to our counterparts at the gas company. They also have a low-income program, and we're looking at cross-promoting the programs so that they'd help promote ours and we'd help promote theirs. So that's where we are. We're expecting that by the end of this year we might have added another 800 or so people to Glendale Care.
For the benefit of our viewers, can you state the income thresholds?
Yes.
Qualify?
The income threshold depends upon the number of in the household, but for a 1- and 2-person household, it's $30,500. For a 3-person household, it's $35,800 a year. For a 4-person household, it's $43,200. 5-person household, it's $50,600 annual income. And then for each additional person, the amount increases by $7,400. This is exactly the same as used by Southern Cal Edison and by the gas company. So we're consistent in the Southern California area. The information on this is also available on our website to anybody that is interested.
Well, I have one more question. Is GWP considering any automatic enrollment? Like if we have Section 8 customers, wouldn't they be automatically enrolled? Or if they're on food stamps, do we have data where they can just be automatically enrolled into our care program?
We had talked about that back about a year ago, and I don't recall the reason, but that wasn't working out. So we haven't done that.
Are we going to continue to look into it?
Well, we could look into it again or some more, but I don't remember what the reason was. There was a specific reason that didn't work. But we can check into it and see.
Yeah, if Glendale has the database that they use, might as well enroll customers and notify them that they're eligible. That's the only way they can know about it and benefit from a lower utility bill.
I think we use the information to notify people. We do not use it is not an automatic enrollment.
Yeah, I'd be interested in seeing how we can help more customers by having them enroll and let them know about it.
Okay.
Thank you, Greg.
Thank you for the update.
Next item, Sheila.
Item 3D, legislation, report number 1, state and federal legislative quarterly report.
Good afternoon, Mr. President, members of the Commission. My name is Lana Haddad, and I'm here as a legislative analyst for GWP. And I'm going to be presenting our quarterly legislative report as well as a monthly update on AB 32. Just as a point of information for everybody, we're going to be doing sort of a rolling update on legislative issues every month along with that monthly update for AB 32. I have been informed by Mr. Steiger that I have only about 90 minutes, so I'm going to keep it really short. Just kidding. The PowerPoint that you see is actually just the skeleton structure of the discussion. I'm actually not a fan of lots of information up on PowerPoint, so I'd prefer just to put the flesh on as we talk. To give you a quick overview, what we're going to be doing is covering the legislative developments on the federal level, incorporating.
Could we dim the lights a bit? Thank you.
Incorporating the conversation around cap and trade that Commissioner Chan had requested last month, and then also an update on the state legislation, including regulatory matters for AB 32. On the packet of materials that you were all given today is included a few different things, one of which is a report that is an addendum with additional relevant bills for GWP at the state level. So I'm going to share one thing that I really have learned over the past, say, 3 months, which is that trying to track legislation is like trying to catch a greased pig. It moves so fast in fits and starts. It is absolutely unpredictable, except that there's a nice deadline at the end of it. So we know that we have until October 11th for the governor to sign the legislation, for example, that's on his desk. On the federal level, what the summer really brought was a tremendous shift in terms of the national public policy priorities. You saw the shift move in the conversation from climate change to healthcare, and it was the topic of many, many heated conversations throughout the nation. So as a result of that, climate change has dropped a little bit. It's still one of the highest priorities, but not the highest. And right now we notice that Congress is working on healthcare bills as we speak today. We're expecting some sort of closure to that in the next few days. Additionally, one of the things that we saw was that the Senate did not have their own climate change bill. Senator Boxer just released the copy of her bill last Thursday, so October 1st. That bill is called let me look it up really quickly. Clean Energy Jobs and American Power Act. That bill alone is another 800 pages of legislation, and it is based on H.R. 2454, the American Clean Energy and Security Act of 2009, also referred to as Waxman-Markey. You'll hear all those names interchanged when they're talked about in the media. On the Senate side, staying with the Senate for a few minutes, there is a package of 3 different tax incentive bills focused on energy efficiency that are being introduced by Senator Feinstein and 2 others, Senator Snowe and Senator Bingaman. And those are still in the very first stages of legislation. They've been introduced. They have not had their first reading yet. On the House side, we've got H.R. 2454, or Waxman-Markey, which did pass in June of 2009. At over 1,000 pages long, this bill is extraordinarily big in both its scale and its scope. It primarily addresses energy policy on a national level in 3 different areas. First is the reduction of or sequestering. They're looking at different mechanisms for controlling carbon emissions, and that goal is very similar to AB 32. Senator Boxer's bill specifies a reduction of emissions of 20% by 2020, which is a little more strict than Waxman-Markey, which is looking at about a 17% reduction by 2020. In comparison, AB 32's goal is about 15% in 2020 with regards to today's levels. Waxman-Markey amends multiple existing policies, laws, and regulations to accomplish the goals that it lays out for itself. It will also look at a reduction in national greenhouse gas emissions of 83% by 2050. So it's a very long-range piece of legislation. So that sort of leads us into the conversation around cap and trade, because cap and trade is an integral part of how ACEs and how the clean energy proposed by Senator Boxer, as well as AB 32, are looking to control greenhouse gas emissions. So a word of a disclaimer is that I am by far not an expert in cap and trade. And I've been doing a lot of reading, and even amongst the experts, there is a tremendous amount of divergence in opinion with regards to what's the most effective means of these different administrative controls on GHG reductions. So what I'm going to try to do now is just kind of give you a brief nutshell version of what cap and trade is. After that, I'll try to outline some of the bigger challenges that we face as a utility because of cap and trade. And then finally, to address your questions, Commissioner Chan, we'll try to look at some of the financial impacts to GWP with regards to cap and trade. So cap and trade at its basic is a common term for one of the administrative approaches called emissions trading, which is used to control pollution by providing economic incentives for achieving reductions in the emissions of greenhouse gases. In this case, our governments, both the state and federal, set a limit or a cap, that's where the cap in cap and trade comes from, on the amount of pollutants that can be emitted by any sources. So companies or other groups are issued emission permits, is one way to look at them. The allowances are also permits or credits, which are required to hold an equivalent number of allowances, and that's one allowance is equivalent to 1 metric ton of emissions, a carbon equivalent or carbon gas. The total amount of permits cannot exceed the cap, and that limits the total emissions to that level. The companies that need to increase their emissions allowance have to buy credits either by purchasing them at set prices, through an auction mechanism from those producers or organizations who produce less. The transfer of the allowances is what's called the trade. In effect, the buyer is paying a charge for polluting, and the people who are selling their credits, because they're not using them all, are being rewarded for not producing as many emissions as the other producers. For California consumers and utilities, both current state law and the proposed federal legislation aim to reduce the carbon emissions by use of this cap-and-trade system. Currently, as passed in the House, H.R. 2454 does give us a 5-year window where it tries to preempt the state from instituting cap-and-trade in addition to its own cap-and-trade. So they're trying to sort of forestall this pancaking of fees for California. However, California Air Resources Board is very actively pushing for the ability to do let me just back up 1 second. Waxman-Markey does, however, allow the states to utilize other mechanisms of control, but not cap and trade. ARB, on the other hand, is pushing so that they still maintain the ability to utilize cap and trade as one of the mechanisms to control, even in addition to the cap and trade on the federal level. As you might imagine, this would have a really negative effect on GWP operational costs and rates. So industry-wide, especially for the POUs, there are numerous issues involved in cap and trade. A recent letter from the American Public Power Association listed some of those challenges and concerns. So one of them would be that we want a cost collar on any of this kind of thing as a cost containment mechanism. A cost collar would set both a minimum and a maximum price, so that would try to control price volatility. It's sort of like a cap and trade hedging measure, since we just had that conversation. And what that really seeks to do is protect the consumer in the instance. This is really a struggle between very legitimate public policy goals. We want clean energy, but we also need affordable energy. A mechanism that sets the maximum emissions allowance cost, we want to make sure that those costs do not raise too high or too quickly for our consumers. Secondly, allowances for the electric sector must be allocated and not auctioned. We are really asking the federal government to look into granting us those allowances to not to the merchant generators, but rather to the distributing companies like GWP, because what ends up happening is that you'll hear a lot of talk about the windfall profits that are generated. If those allocations go to the merchant generators as opposed to the distributing companies, and they're allocated to them, so they get them for free, and they turn around and sell them to people because they haven't met their emissions, then they are actually generating profits on the backs, essentially, of the taxpayer. We don't want that to happen. So what we're saying is, as a distributing company, we're the ones who should be receiving those allowances on the federal level. Third, the electric sector must be allocated allowances in an amount sufficient to continue operations at the beginning of the program. So just, for example, imagine that you are starting a diet and you really have a strong goal. Say if you're a woman, you're a size 12. If you're a guy, you're a size 40 in the waistband, right? And so your nutrition counselor says, you know what, we're going to really get you motivated. We're going to throw away all your clothes and we're going to buy them 25% smaller. So now all of a sudden that size 40 waist becomes a size 30 waist, and that size 12 becomes a size 8. Well, you can't wear those clothes. They're of no use to you, and you have now limited your operations in a way that is actually detrimental to your consumers. So it's really important that the electric sector does receive enough allowances to continue, even though there's built-in caps. The cap will get tighter and tighter, just like your waist will get smaller and smaller as you diet with time, but it's important that those become reasonable and achievable goals. You don't want to set the goal so high that it's not doable, that it has a really negative impact on our ratepayers. Finally, compliance targets need to allow for the appropriate transition periods for implementations of the programs and the availability of alternative technologies. And going back to our diet metaphor, we really want to make sure that we're setting reasonable goals here, and that you're enabling the organizations who need to meet these mandates to be able to do so in a manner that's both cost-effective and timely. So the fiscal impact of GWP in that packet of materials that I referred to earlier, you'll notice that there was a report that was given to City Council back in January of 2009. On page 4 of that report, you're going to see a chart that shows the electric sector is responsible for roughly in the state about 23% of greenhouse gas emissions. And this is significant because now we're talking about AB 32's regulations. And that scoping plan that was adopted proposes that the electric sector is responsible for about 27 to 30% of the greenhouse gas emissions reductions that are required to reach our 2020 target. So there's some additional numbers, and I'll be happy to break it down further if you want. But when you add up all of the reductions that we are responsible for in the electric sector, we're looking at approximately 45.2 million metric tons of emissions in order so that we can meet the 2020 targets. So that would be about 27% of the reductions in total. So assuming a price of about $110 per megawatt for the new renewables as compared to the cost of resources that they will replace, i.e. coal, what we're looking at is approximately 1 cent per kilowatt hour to our consumers. That rate, though, that additional increase, and now I'm reading some of Steve's work, so you have to give me a second to catch up to his expertise. Using an average of 14 cents, a 1 cent increase is approximately 7% raise. However, in addition to the source-specific reduction measures that are required to achieve that AB 32 goal, this scoping plan also relies on a cap-and-trade program, and that comes along with its own prices as well. So ARB's economic modeling forecasts an allowance price of $10 per ton. Obviously, they're going to look at a really low cost. The industry, though, is feeling that that's not realistic at all, and what the numbers that we are using as our assumption is actually $100 per ton. With that particular price, what we're looking at, most of our sister utilities are looking at a range of between $10 per allowance to $150 per ton as the range. And at that cost, that breaks down to $5.22 per kilowatt hour, which gives us a ballpark range of 1 to 6 cents, which translates to 7 to 43% increases for GWP. Now, one huge caveat here, which I'm just going to briefly touch on as it leads into the state discussion, is that this does not, if for example, AB 64, which looked to specify California-only purchases for renewable energy, that would require the building of new transmission within the state that will also have an additional effect on the cost of these particular policies. So this additional increase that you're seeing here, the 7 to 43%, does not include building transmission for California-only renewables if that law is signed into effect. Also, this does not take into account the federal levels. If we are not exempted somehow, or that the federal does not preempt the state, then we're looking at potentially double those numbers if something like that should happen. So moving on, I did want to mention something. We talked a little bit about some of the emissions. Flying back from Sacramento, one of the things that we saw was that there was a little flyer in the Southwest magazine, and basically what it talked about was that 20% of all of the U.S. methane emissions are coming from cows. So scientists are working on reducing those emissions too by breeding a cow that actually produces less gas. Just thought I'd share a little fun tidbit on the emissions front. Finally, on the state level update, we'll get to the regulatory AB 32 first, and then we'll go into the legislation. On Friday, September 25th, the ARB approved the staff's revised administrative fee regulations, contingent on a 15-day comment period. We did see some improvements there. The definition of imported electricity was revised as SCAPA, which is the Southern California Public Power Association, had requested, and they worked really hard at that, so that energy that is in the course of wheeling electricity through California, we wouldn't be exposed to the administrative fee. So that limits some of our exposure to that fee. However, the fee would be charged on both legs of an exchange agreement. So both on the import and the export leg, that GWP would see an administrative fee collected on those two in an exchange. SCAPA board members the ARB board members were concerned about SCAPA's comments, because one of the things that Norm Peterson, who is our regulatory attorney for SCAPA, had mentioned was that that double charging the out-of-state exchanges could constitute a violation of the Commerce Clause. the Constitution, but it's seemingly neither the members of the board nor the chair were concerned enough to direct staff to revise that particular proposed regulation. So that still stands to be seen where that goes after it certainly is implemented. For AB 32, the Economic and Allocation Advisory Committee, called EAC, has been formed and the members selected. Interestingly, there's only one person on that particular committee who is from Southern California. It turns out that D.C. and the Ivy League colleges have more of a presence on that particular committee than Southern California does, which is unfortunate because in California we make up about 2/3 of the consumers in the state. So the purposes of EAC include evaluating the allowance allocation strategies involving free allocation, auction, or some combination thereof, advising CARB regarding the costs and benefits to various options involving the distribution of cap-and-trade allowances, and providing CARB revisions to its economic analysis, and then finally preparing a report with its findings by the end of 2002. So you will be hearing about that, hopefully at the January meeting, if we get it in a timely way. As defined in the bill, of course, you know the greenhouse gases include the 6 that are specified. There is some current state legislation which will amend AB 32 specifically. AB 1404 limits to 10% the use of offsets in certain industries, and SB 104 adds another greenhouse gas to the mix, nitrogen trifluoride as another GHG. And those bills currently right now are sitting on the governor's desk awaiting his signature. For AB 64, there's much storm and drang, right? So the bills did pass through both houses of the legislature. They are enrolled and they are currently sitting on the governor's desk for signature. However, the governor made a very clear statement before the last September meeting, and I reported to you last month, that he had called those bills protectionist. He was not happy with the California only, and had, in fact, on September 15th, released and signed an executive order directing ARB to increase, am I going too long? Okay. Directing ARB to increase the renewable portfolio standard to 33%. However, we still keep getting reports that they're working on it, which we don't know what that means because he's either going to sign them or veto them at this point. So we're just holding fast. He has until October 11th to take an action. We're doing also some research because we were curious to see what would happen if they just sat on his desk and he didn't sign them. And from the legislative cycle map that I think I've given you all, a process map, it looks as if they actually become law even if he doesn't sign them, as long as he doesn't veto them. So we're really pushing for a veto from the governor on those bills. We are, and I have to say this too, GWP, like all of SCAPA, is really very supportive of the 33 by 20% by 2020. The trouble is that these kind of bills really restrict the ability for GWP to go do that in a way that's cost effective. We are not opposed to the 33%. In fact, GWP did some very, and SCAPA did some very labor-friendly things with regards to our trying to influence that whole process up there. But they're very, very married to the idea of California only. So it's a very political thing at this point. It's not necessarily about, I don't want to talk out of school, so I'm just going to leave it at that. So that's AB 64. SB 407. Council had actually shown some interest some time ago about requiring local real estate purchases to install at the point of sale water conservation, what's the term I'm looking for? Water conserving plumbing fixtures. And so this is actually state legislation that is currently enrolled, currently awaiting the governor's signature, and it looks as if on the state level it's happening. So there's no reason for Glendale to do it because it's happening on the state level. We're looking at, I think it's 2017 for it to take effect. It is a state-mandated local program with some financial implications, and it does exempt itself out from having to reimburse the city for those expenses. Our big tour this past weekend was on the Delta package summary. As you may be aware, the entire water package fell apart in the last day of the legislation, so there was nothing really to report out. There was nothing sitting on the governor's desk. All 4 of those bills just ended up languishing. However, the situation is dire, and it is expected that the governor might be calling okay, it's tentatively expected that the governor might call a special session on water. And actually, given the news that we all received, and hopefully you'll be receiving in the next few weeks, you'll see the urgency of the situation really demands for some attention. The trouble with this particular Delta package is that it does not include a financing option. So it's really good policy with no funding attached to it. And that was one of those sources that was a point of contention. So we wanted to be sure that whatever does pass does contain some sort of funding mechanism for the state. And then the addendum, I think, also explains all the additional bills. I'll be happy to go through them, or I can pause now and wait and see if there's any questions.
Thank you very much for the update. I understand the cap and trade issue is extremely complicated, and I appreciate your effort in explaining it. And I look forward to monthly updates. Thanks.
And also, thank you, Ms. Haddad. It's a great explanation on cap and trade. But I was wondering, are we doing anything to offset or maybe start implementing such a mechanism through energy efficiency or buying offsets? I mean, those are the other measures that we can do in the meantime. Are we doing those type of things now?
I wouldn't be the person to answer those.
But I can answer that for you. The answer is yes. What we are doing, of course, is increasing our renewable portfolio. And we've been doing that quite aggressively in the last year. And in fact, more recently, we've entered into a few agreements with Los Angeles on some renewable contracts where we maintain the option over the first 3 years of the contracts to either allow LA to take the renewable energy or for us to bring it back, and at the end of the 3 years then we can bring it back to integrate into our portfolio, because as Steve mentioned earlier, our portfolio standard right now is fairly healthy at about 23%. On top of that, we have one of the most aggressive energy efficiency conservation programs in the state in terms of municipals. We always sit within the first 3 or 4, sometimes number 1 in the state in terms of the percentage efficiency achieved. So, we're very aggressive in both of those areas. So that's a very good point. I'm glad you brought that up. In achieving what we need to achieve, which does go right to the bottom line of reducing our carbon footprint, so to speak. But as we move ahead, we will continue to be aggressive so that we stay ahead of whatever comes out of AB 32 or the federal guidelines, because we don't know at this point whether federal will preempt state or not. So there's still a lot of unknowns. So we are just being much more aggressive so that we're ahead of whatever happens.
Great, thank you. And also, some of my meetings with outside agencies, I realized that CARB, as you mentioned, is going to move ahead with the implementation of AB 32 regardless of what happens. And you pointed out that was the case, that they want to move forward with it because they still need to comply with state law. Mm-hmm. So how would they go about anticipating that the federal law might be coming and it might preempt them? Are they still really proceeding with that path and with blinders on that we're going to implement AB 32 regardless of what happens? Is that your take on that too?
Well, I think that they're in a little bit of a foot race at this point because they really want to get it under the wire, so to speak. One of the things that, and I really can't speak too much about it, but one of the things I do know is I don't think they're going in with blinders on. They're very actively trying to influence the federal government. And at the same time, one of the things that they're doing here is they've been taking sort of loans from other funds in order to fund the operations of ARB, because this AB 32 actually set up its own financing streams, except they haven't. It's been underfunded as well. So there's definitely not blinders on. They're very actively trying to influence the process in Washington, D.C.
Is it all being flexible and maybe not implement something where the federal government would come in and undo what they've done? So they're all looking at those type of flexibilities as well. That what
I would hope so.
Okay. We all hope so.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Cheetah?
Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. You have a question?
Yeah. I thank you for your presentation. What's the relation of the federal regulation to the state? Is the state going to supersede the federal regulation?
Generally speaking, the federal law, you can't go below the federal law. However, a state can always make a law more stringent, and that's why California has always set the bar with regards to energy conservation and renewable energy. So they could go higher unless the federal government, and I'm not an attorney and I'm not a legal scholar, although I love the law, I do think that unless the federal law specifically exempts the states from, making it more stringent. So in this case, that's why it would be written into the federal legislation that they had to preempt, and specifically said preempt the state law on this particular issue.
Okay. And in particular, with this federal law, H.R. 2454, is it going to be essentially covered by AB 32, or is AB 32 setting more stringent standards than what we find there?
AB 32 is setting more stringent standards, but I'm not quite sure about how they're planning on the implementation of both simultaneously. So that's going to be sort of the question that we're all trying to unravel at this time.
Okay. All right. You mentioned EAC has no Southern Californians on it.
Has one Southern California.
Pardon me, then. Yeah, who sets the committee that forms EAC, so to speak, or how does one get on it?
I actually think they were appointed by, it was a process, but the chair of ARB was one of the people who was deciding who was appointed to that particular committee. So they were hand-selected folks from across the nation.
To what extent would an agency like GWP have input on that?
At this point, it's kind of a done deal. They're moving forward, and they're supposed to be, it's a kind of a finite committee, so they're over at the end of 2009.
Okay. All right, thanks.
You're welcome. Commissioner Walker? Miller? One thing I did want to just note, I'm sorry about that. One thing I did want to note is that SCAPA was very active, and Norm Peterson in particular had a lot of dialogue with them when they were trying to do the selection process. But there's only so much you can do, and then...
Understood, and his efforts are appreciated. Thank you.
Okay, I'll relay that to him. Thank you.
Anything else? Next item, please.
Item 3E, Electric, Report Number 1, Electrical Services Reliability Indices.
Commissioner Yao, Commissioners, Mr. Steiger, Henry Brody, Principal Electrical Engineer with Electrical Services, here to give a report on our outage reports and also on our major indices. Basically, for the month of September, we had 4 outages. During this period, on September 2nd, we had an equipment failure. We had an elbow that failed on us, and in an underground vault at the corner of Broadway and Maryland. That affected 84 customers for 45 minutes and 179 customers for 76 minutes. We also had 2 other outages. One, Western Feeder number 2, relayed due to unknown causes that affected 1,653 customers for 9 minutes. And then we also had the famous Mylar balloon that tripped our Montrose Feeder number 4, and that was at the corner of Alpha Road and Verdugo Road, affecting 1,584 customers for 72 minutes. We also had one of the projects that we're working on right now is we are actually installing 4 different fault recorders at 4 stations. We've already completed installation of those fault recorders at Western Substation, and we are in the process of installing one in Rossmore Substation, and we have 2 other ones coming in the near future, one over at our Kellogg GIS and one at Tropical Substation. Unfortunately, during the installation of the fault recorders at our Rossmore station, our workers accidentally tripped 2 of our feeders, Rossmore number 7 and number 8, and that affected 1,153 customers for 6 minutes. We've taken precautions and new procedures has been put in place so that that won't happen again. At this point, I'd like to go over the indices, the charts that we have. Our first indices is, as soon as I can get this going. Right. Okay. We have our SAFE index, System Average Interruption Frequency Index. That's basically the total number of customers interrupted divided by the total number of customers at GWP. And as you can see here, our goal is to be below 1. And so far for the past 12 months, We've been at 0.672, which means that there has been 55,339 customers affected. But for the month of September, we've done pretty well. Our index is 0.056. Our next index is our SAIDI, System Average Interruption Duration Index. That's the total outage time divided by total number of customers. Commissioner Miller, that rolling average got corrected in this on this slide. Our goal is to be below 40 minutes, and for the past 12 months, our average has been 32 minutes, and for the month of September, our average has been, our index has been 1.9 minutes. Our next index is our KD, Customer Average Interruption Duration Index. That's the total outage time divided by the total number of customers affected. And our goal for that has been 40 minutes or less, and our average for the past 12 months has been 48, and for the month of September, our index has been 33 minutes. So we are below our average. Any questions?
I have a question.
Sure.
The second outage event where the feeder relayed due to unknown cause.
Right.
For something like that, how do you go about investigating, resolving the issue, and also preventing it?
Basically, what happens is that what we try to do is try to get a troubleman out immediately if it is off hours. If it is during the working hours, our crews immediately basically spread around where the feeder area is, and they try to look for visible signs. For example, in the case of our outage number 1, which actually affected a portion of the downtown area, including our own building. Unfortunately, what happens is that we were able to spot the smoke actually coming out of the vault, and once that happens, immediately we start a process where we try to isolate the fault, and that was basically done. We start trying to work basically as close to the station as possible, and then we work out. And in case number 1, fortunately, we were able to first isolate the problem to an area, and then we'll try to turn the feeder to basically put the feeder back on and energize it. If it doesn't get if it doesn't energize, then we know that it probably encompasses a larger area or is closer to the station. But if it doesn't trip, then we know that we are getting closer, and we try to slowly get closer to where the outage area was. In the case of the western feeder, they patrol the area. They don't find any problems. They radio to Howard that they can close the feeder, and it holds. And that's evident from the time that it took. It's about 9 minutes. So that means that. And part of the procedure also is that they usually wait about 5 minutes, and they try to close it without patrolling it. And if it holds, then we know that it might be an accidental contact of a tree, and or maybe there was a metal balloon that caused the outage, but it got freed, or it basically blew itself out. So that's basically the procedure for that.
So you investigate, you isolate, and you give it some time, and then
Exactly.
you're able to energize again.
Exactly.
Okay. All right, thanks.
I had a question on this KD chart. So our goal is 40 minutes.
Right.
And rolling last 12 months, we haven't been meeting our goal. Is that right?
For the past 12 months, we haven't been meeting our goal. We haven't been meeting our goal because of some earlier outages that actually quite they were longer. But like for example, for the month of September, we were lower, so that will help bring that average down.
So do you have numbers for July and August also? Are they closer to less than 40 minutes? Or
Fortunately, we were doing very well. Like, for example, last month we didn't have any outages, and a couple of months before that we didn't have any outages. So that actually helps us bring the averages, bring that average down. So, but we have all the numbers available in this outage. In this chart, we are basically running the average, rolling average for the past 12 months, plus the index just for the month of September.
No, the trend is improving. So obviously, have we taken any measures, or we've just been fortunate?
Well, we have taken measures. Fortunately, what happens is that if you look at what causes outages, there are several factors. Obviously, one is equipment failure. As I've mentioned before, what we've been trying to do is that we've been focusing on areas that we have older equipment in, and we've been trying to upgrade those areas. That's in the area of the equipment, which it's actually a sticky area because it involves quite a bit of capital budget, and the more money you spend, obviously you can't afford to reinstall brand new equipment everywhere. So what you have to do is you have to try to maximize your installations with the money that we have available. In the areas, another reason for outages is we have birds or squirrels that they get into lines. So what we try to do is we have animal guards that we install on our overhead lines, on our poles, on our terminators on the poles. That's another area that we try to be pretty aggressive on. And of course, number three, an area that has been very effective for us is our vegetation management, which having a very good vegetation management where we have our crews that go around and aggressively on an yearly basis, they patrol, they basically inspect our lines, and they try to cut back the vegetation, and they try to keep that cycle, that annual cycle, going very aggressively, and that has helped us tremendously. The fourth area that has helped us is in the area that we have 50% of our system is 12 kV, another 50% is 4 kV. We pretty much had an aggressive effort in converting some of those areas to 12 kV, such as Gorilla area with the Gorilla substation going in. That area basically is right now 100% converted to 12 kV. When you go to 12 kV, you have bigger clearances. The bigger clearances helps out because now the birds can't span along the lines, or the vegetations, trees can't get in there. So it's actually a safer system. It helps our reliability. So those are the areas that we're working on, and it's helped us. And fortunately, we can keep that downward trend going, and we can improve our reliability.
Thank you.
Yes, a few questions here. Your blue line there, is that meant to represent the 12-month average?
That is our index. That's our index, and as you can see, like for the that's our average. Yes, that's a rolling average
for the 12 months,
yes.
right?
Yes.
And then your trend line, is that like a least square method best fit line, or because it seems to be it goes between all the points, but I don't see it sending at a point that's up there on your.
Well, I think because of having that high KD index on in May, that actually is pushing that up. Is what it's doing.
Okay. The trend is going upwards, so the question is how is it being reversed, which I think you addressed here.
Right.
How is I think we've talked about this in previous meetings, but it's probably helpful to go over it again. How do we set the goals for these indices? Like the goal right here is set for 40 minutes.
Part of that goal was set as part of our strategic
planning. Okay, all right. Could we go to your first graph with the SAFE? I think that's a System Average Interruption Frequency Index. Your trend there is curvilinear. It's not rectilinear like in the previous graph. I'm just wondering, trying to understand. It's not between the points. I'm not quite certain how that trend line was developed.
I think that's because it's a rolling average, and that's why it kind of smooths out the curvature.
Okay, so it's calculated in a different way, obviously, than from the.
Yes.
It's not. It doesn't seem like it works unlike the previous graph we were looking at where it went between the points. Here it seems to be disproportionately low. I just want to point that out. I think in the future it would be nice to standardize the stuff. It helps it for understanding. And I want to congratulate you on the very low values you got for September. That's quite impressive.
Thank you.
That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have one quick one, Mr.
Sure.
Abari. You mentioned that 50% are 12 kV lines now.
Right.
And the objective was to maybe convert all our system into 12 kV. Is that the plan?
That's correct.
When would that happen? Can you remind us again? Because I think Mr. Abari mentioned in the past. Can you quickly?
We talked about by 2018.
Yes.
I think 2018. We are planning to have that at 12 kV.
And what percentage per year are we expecting to make the conversion into 2018?
As far as having a percentage, I think more or less I don't have that number. We can certainly work on that and bring back a report on where we're going with that.
Yeah, it's not a linear percentage. Some years we do more, some years we do less.
Yeah, but they're talking about percentage change per year. How much are we going to convert each year until we get 100%?
Basically, one of the things that we look at is that we basically have to look at an area. We have to look at different feeder areas. We have to look at different substations. And what we are looking at, for example, as you may be very well aware of, our next project is Glorieta. Then we are looking at our Grandview substations, and we're looking at our Bel Air substations, and our next step would be to look at our Howard and Fremont and Acacia substations. So then the feeder areas for the substations is what actually dictates to us how much of it can be converted. And once we convert those substations to 12 kV, that actually will finalize that for us.
Anything else? Thank you, Mr. Barabi.
Thank you.
Sheeta, may we have next item, please?
Item 3F, Water, Report Number 1, Water Supply Report.
Good afternoon, President Yao, Commissioners. I'm Pat Hayes, Principal Civil Engineer, GWP Water. With your permission, looking at the agenda for the three items I'm covering, Water Supply Report, Chevy Chase update, and Water Conservation update, I'd like to cover first the Chevy Chase update, and then the other two I think will flow better into each other, one from the next. Chevy Chase update, the project is about 99% complete at this time. Reservoirs in service, the pump stations in service. The remaining activities are landscaping and putting the golf course back in service, which involves laying turf for both the fairway and the hole number 5 that was taken out of service for the project, as well as covering a stream that is open channel at the top. So that work is all expected to be completed by the end of this year on schedule with our terms with the golf course to turn it back over to them. There is some concern about the ability of the turf to take hold depending on the weather conditions, but so far things are holding good in that regard. Any questions about Chevy Chase?
Go ahead.
So we stayed on schedule, on budget.
On schedule, yes.
Under budget.
On the budget.
There have been a few issues along the way in terms of budget. Where we were most impacted was a delay when we found groundwater, potentially contaminated groundwater, and soil and rock conditions different than what were expected. In the preliminary phase, the borings were taken around the reservoir site, but not through the reservoir. Obviously, the reservoir has gone back into the same location, so it's the nature of borings that tell you exactly what's happening right where they're taken, but not necessarily can you extrapolate that. And it turned out that there was more soil cement involved than in actual rock removal, and that resulted in some delay and some cost. But we were on track to be done by the end of the year.
So did we go over the anticipated contingencies?
No, we have not.
We have not. Okay,
We're still
thank
well
you.
within that.
Well, I wanted to congratulate you and everyone associated with the team who worked on that. It worked out nicely. And I also wanted to say that although my exposure to it was necessarily somewhat limited, I thought GWP did an excellent job of working with the community there. I think I would say it formed a good model for dealing with difficult projects involving local communities. So thank you for that.
Thank you for that as well, Commissioner Miller. We're starting to get inquiries from other communities about how it was handled because apparently the word's out that it went pretty well. Good news. If you excuse me for a second, I'll bring up the next part. At this point, I'll move into a water supply report. You have the packet there with number of pages.
Could we dim the lights, please? Pardon me. Pardon my interruption. Go ahead.
Talking about water supply, things are generally looking pretty good. Our goal is to stay under 70% of our supply coming from Metropolitan Water District, and we're currently running at 63% of it supplied by Metropolitan. This shows you the cumulative Metropolitan Water District deliveries, and you can see the bottom and darkest line on here is for 2009. Is showing something very good from our perspective. You recall in July we implemented a water conservation ordinance which actually didn't take effect till August, but we started getting some of the value of the publicity, I believe, on that and the outreach program, so that the Metropolitan Water District deliveries trended downward, even though both evapotranspiration and temperatures were still reasonably high. So that's a good trend line. Our deliveries are down. That means our purchased water is down, and I'll get into that in a moment. The next graph of interest is that having to do with water conservation, which I presented here. The darker bars show the historic and previous year's use of water. The trend line graph there shows what our target is for a 10% reduction, and the blue bars show what's actually happened. And you can see that in both July and August of 2009, this fiscal year, that we are exceeding our goal, and we'd like to make sure the public is aware that we are succeeding here, and whatever you're doing, please continue doing it because it's going in the right direction. You can't read it quite in the fine print on this graph, but perhaps in the documents you have, the number down here at the bottom shows about a 16% decrease from last year for our consumption.
To clarify, that's 2006, actually, which is the base year.
2006, the target year.
Not 2008.
The last thing on these graphs I'd like to speak to is we work closely with our finance and risk management group within GWP, and this graph was prepared jointly with them. It's a handy tool for us because what it's intended to do is show our trend line if we're going to stay within our allocation formula from MWD. If we exceed that formula, we pay a fine at the end of the year. The upper line on this graph shows what we needed to do to stay within compliance, or without having to pay a fine, I should say. And the blue line at the bottom, there's only 2 data points so far, July and August, but they're trending positively, so that if you look in the yellow box, the projected MWD penalty at this time is 0, and that is directly due to the water conservation efforts of the community. So if we could have the lights back. This graph both is a good thing and potentially a bad thing from a water utilities point of view. Water utilities operate pretty much on a fixed cost basis. So when we see a reduction in sales, we start to be concerned about making sure that we're covering our costs directly. You should have been given a graph entitled Glendale Water and Power Water Utility Fiscal Year 09-10 Monthly Summary. And this on this table, I'm sorry, it's a separate piece of paper. So we went back to our finance and risk management group within the utility and had them prepare some numbers for us. To step you through this, oddly enough, I'd point you to the bottom of this graph to start, or this table, and where it discusses the volume in acre feet that we've consumed. Actual versus budget for MWD purchases, we're down for both these 2 periods a combined average of 29%. So we're spending less money at $701 an acre foot of purchasing water from the Metropolitan Water District. That's a good thing. But we're also taking in less revenue because of the reduction in sales. We want to make sure that we're staying in a relatively revenue neutral state. These are only 2 data points. This is very early in the process, but these are the kinds of numbers that we're asking our finance group to help track for us. It shows us on both our total summary as well as the 2 components to that, base summary and adjustable summary, that we're still not in a negative situation because of the reduction in sales of water. So overall, that's a fairly positive circumstance. That concludes my report. Any questions?
Congratulations. This is great news with the conservation success. I have a question on the water main break issue. I know that's not on the agenda, but since I am personally aware of one major water main break issue, so I thought maybe you can give us an update on that.
I'd be happy to. Did you have a specific question or just a general
Can you
one?
just update us as to the issues in the city and how many breaks are we looking at? And where are they in terms of resolution or process of, correcting?
We track that as a metric, much like you saw for the electric performance. Mm-hmm. Our goal for the year is 38 or fewer main breaks. The majority of those are quite small. Last year, we were well within the confines of that. I think it was something like 16 or 17. I'm not exactly sure what that number was, but I do have that if you're interested. So we're doing fairly well in that regard. Of course, in the general regional issue, there's been some serious main breaks that have occurred with the LA Department of Water and Power that has brought the focus on them. Unfortunately, they've had a very large capital improvement program that was just behind where one of their major breaks occurred. So it's just unfortunate that within a year's time they probably would have had that line replaced. In our situation, we're very sensitive to main breaks. There are several drivers for them. Age is not necessarily a factor. I think the industry would agree on that. Our metric of 38 is based on our populations and the number of miles of pipe. It's a metric that the American Water Works Association and some of the other water agencies have collectively defined for our type and size of city. So 38 is the number. We're about half of that in the last year. Generally speaking, we have 1 or 2 serious main breaks a year, resulting in property damage, street closure, and some considerable cost. We are working mightily to reduce that. Fortunately, our system is fairly sound. We don't have aggressive soils, acidic soils that will eat our pipes from the outside. When main breaks occur, we do as we can, a forensic analysis to determine what caused the main break. There are a variety of things that do cause it. A lot of them have to do with the soils and soil movement. For example, on hillsides where you have pipes and fill slopes, even though they might be there for a long period of time, there is some creep in those soils that puts stresses on joints in pipes and can cause leakage. The pipes themselves are structurally sound, so that's fortunately not one of our concerns. There are other places where there, in the case of Grandview, many utilities in that street, including a storm drain that's almost the size of this room, buried some 15 or 16 feet below all the other utilities. There were real compaction issues with that historically, with settlements and whatnot. Main break occurred there in November last year, which is just now being repaired. And along with that, they're correcting some of these other related problems. Rather than spend the time and money trying to figure out exactly what happened there, it's been a joint effort with us and Public Works to repair the overall street problems and the main at the same time. One really encouraging factor coming forward with our advanced metering infrastructure undertaking, where both electric and water are swapping out all of their water and electric meters, we will be installing leak detection devices. They're passive acoustic sensors that will be sitting about every fifth meter, listening in the dark hours of the night for leaks, which have a very significant acoustic sensor signature to them. And from that, we hope to get some advance warning of potential leaks and be able to investigate and repair them prior to them becoming a major failure in the street.
And when is the beginning of that program?
That program is underway now. We're in the early phases establishing the computer infrastructure, backhaul, and basic ability to receive the data, and then it will roll forward over the next 2 years. Within about 2 years' time, all meters will be in place, and they'll be all new meters, and about 5,800 acoustic leak detection devices out there as well. So it looks promising for the future.
Yes. Thank you very much.
Mr. Hayes, I have a question regarding your monthly summary.
Yes.
What did the risk department project as the point or the savings where it becomes negative income? If we continue on this path of water conservation, will we see a negative income?
We haven't projected forward so much as just did a pulse check about where we were at this point. It depends on a number of factors, and unlike this curve where we can sort of predict what we need to see out there, it depends on the continued engagement in water conservation. And another factor not shown here is that as of October 1, the rates for water went up to the $701. They were previously $579. There's a couple of moving parameters. We're asking the finance and risk management people to continue to track this on a monthly basis. And if you'd like, we'll continue to report back to you on that.
Yeah, I was just very curious because we're telling the residents to conserve, and then at the same time, as we mentioned before the conservation ordinance hit, that we projected if people conserve too much, then we might lose the revenue as the base revenue that we're looking at. So from this chart, even though we're 2 data points, it seems like we're still in a positive income. But I was curious if we actually, maybe if all the stars collide, do we actually see a net income or do we continue to see a path? I mean, even though you mentioned that there's other factors involved, at which point we want to anticipate when those things happen to create a net income so that you can come back to us and maybe to the City Council to request the additional change to make up.
So just to summarize, the water conservation is working splendidly. We were able to conserve in what we were purchasing and continue with our local supplies. If the local supplies for some reason are diminished, a pump goes offline, recycling has supply issues, any sort of speculative thing you might come up with, that means it has to be replaced with purchased water, and then everything changes pretty quickly here because of the higher rates we're now paying for the Met water.
I think I'd like to ask Bill Fox, who's our Assistant General Manager of Finance.
Welcome, Mr. Fox.
Hi, Chairman Yellen and members of the Commission. In fact, we're working very closely with the Water Group as well as the Electrical Group
and trying to do just additional projections to try to answer the question that you asked. Through that projection process, we can make a determination if we need to, in fact, adjust rates. We want to do some additional work in that area, and then we may be coming back to you to inform you of a rate adjustment that's needed in January.
Thank you. It's very helpful. Anything? Any other questions? Go ahead.
Yes, I had a few questions. Your table here indicates MWD purchase year-to-date percent difference of minus 30%.
Yes.
Is that from the previous year, 12 months, or what period of time?
I'll let Bill.
Okay.
We'll be a tag team on this.
Okay, that's fine.
This particular table, we're talking about budget to actual. We went ahead in advance when preparing the annual budget. We budgeted on a month-by-month basis what we thought the revenues and expenses were. We had a good handle on what we thought the expense was for the MWD water purchases. What this shows is our actual expenses that we got from billings from MWD versus what we had budgeted for. So that's what you're seeing.
I see. And that's the same for the volume then?
Same for the volume, yes. It's right from the
Okay, because I was trying to correlate it with your conservation.
His numbers are slightly different than ours. Ours are based upon the budget versus the actual billings that came in.
Okay. And how does that affect the income, the revenue, I guess? The question I'd be concerned about is how does the revenue comparing with your expense, which is what you've got here at the top?
Well, at this point, I can't give you a very good answer on it because we just started looking at this. As we prepared this chart today, we realized that we have a lot more projection that's needed to do to take a look at the relationships.
Then I presume we'll hear about it in the future meetings. Thank you.
We're planning on that.
Okay, thank you. I did have one other question. Your water conservation graph here is total MWD plus locally, right?
Which graph are you looking at specifically?
This graph here, which is the bar graph.
Yes.
Okay. Well, I did want to say I think everybody needs to celebrate the fact that we have done so well, and in particular the ratepayers need to be congratulated. And thank you for sharing the good news.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next item, please.
Item 4, oral communications.
I don't have any cards here, so next.
Item 5, old business.
Do you have any old business? Mr. Miller?
Yes. Actually, this is maybe not quite old business, except in the context of it being brought up earlier in the meeting. Thank you very much for the quarterly report. And I did want to say I hope it's not costing too much extra staff time, and perhaps some of the other reports that you've been providing could be subsumed in this, or have you already done that?
Many have been, many more will be, yes.
Okay, all right. And so hopefully the net effect will be not to have taxed the staff's time?
No, in fact, it's a much more efficient way of doing this.
Okay. Well, congratulations to everyone on this. Thank you very much. I think it'll make great reading.
And this will be posted online as well, Mrs. Steiger?
Yes.
Oh, great. Is it there now, or is it
is.
Okay, great. Any other old business? New business? I'm sorry.
One thing. I remember we talked about the integrated resource plan a while back.
Correct.
I think that is on the agenda already, right?
We expect to get initial results, I believe, this month. That was...
This month?
Is that correct, Steve? Yeah. So we should have our initial results this month. We may be able to make some kind of, a preliminary report at the next commission meeting. It really depends on what we find.
Okay. Next one, November or December?
November, by December for certain, yes.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Anything else? Next item, Sheila.
Agenda forecast.
We will put on the, I believe it's on the November agenda, the presentation regarding the Bay Delta.
Yes.
Okay, very good. And then next month we're also hearing on the quarterly report or review, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Anything else? Next item.
Adjournment.
Do I hear a motion to adjourn?
I so move.
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Meeting's adjourned. The next Glendale Water and Power Commission meeting will be on Monday, November 2nd, 2009. Thank you.